I'm like at a loss for things to say all year about the reception. So there is one thing I want to say though. If Celeste has helped you come to terms with mental illness, I just want to say that you deserve credit for that. That change came from inside of you, and you're capable of a lot more. Thank you.
That is Maddie Thorson, one of the co-creators of the acclaimed precision platformer Celeste, accepting the award for Best Independent Game at the 2018 Game Awards. Maddie's words here reflect Celeste's core messages to its players, especially those who struggle with mental health issues. In an age where depression, anxiety, and other forms of mental illness are becoming increasingly common, Madeline's story of overcoming mental illness proved to be incredibly meaningful to many. Countless videos exist all over the internet analyzing and celebrating the game's mental health motifs, and I'm seeking to do that here as well. But instead of speaking on the broader message of the game, like many others, I want to take a look at one of the game's less talked about themes of self-reflection and introspection, and how those themes translate to the real world. In order to overcome mental illness, self-reflection is an important step to understand and come to terms with mental health problems, a process that is very prevalent in the game's story. This is an important yet often overlooked part of the game that I believe has greatly impacted me and hopefully many others, so let's take a closer look. Let's start with introducing our good friend Madeline, the initial antagonist to our main character. Madeline is a representation of all the flaws and insecurities that Madeline is reluctant to acknowledge, and is the part of her that she will have to confront throughout the story. We first meet her in Chapter 2 as Madeline comes across a mirror in the ruins she finds herself in. As she takes a closer look, however, her reflection becomes sentient and even shatters and escapes the mirror. This is, of course, Madeline, and as the game progresses, it becomes increasingly clear that she is more than just a doppelganger. When the two meet later in the chapter, Madeline describes herself as a part of Madeline, and even tries to talk her out of her goal of climbing Celeste Mountain, telling her that she isn't a mountain climber. Later in the Celeste Resort in Chapter 3, when Madeline is trying to convince Mr. Oshiro, the resort's deceased director now haunting the establishment, to let her leave, Madeline emerges to tell Oshiro some harsh but brutally honest truths about him and the resort, possibly thoughts that Madeline was keeping to herself all along. In almost every sense of the word, Madeline is a mental, emotional, and physical reflection of Madeline's darker side. The character's dark purple color scheme, the doubt that Madeline can even climb Celeste Mountain in her attempts to talk her out of it, the cold, sarcastic demeanor she often takes on, the chase scene after their conversation in Chapter 2, all of it gives off the impression of some twisted reflection of Madeline. But this is not just some evil twin. As Madeline tells us herself, she's a part of Madeline, one that's been repressed in favor of her more positive side. In Chapter 4, Granny, the guardian mentor character in the game, tells Madeline that the mountain doesn't bring out anything that isn't already there, suggesting that these dark parts represented within Madeline have existed for a very long time, before the story even takes place. As Madeline progresses up the mountain, however, she'll come to understand this part of her, as she looks inside and reflects upon herself and the darker side of her personality. Chapters 5 and 6, The Mirror Temple and Reflection, are the two chapters in the game that represents the process of self-reflection and what it results in. The Mirror Temple is a direct representation of introspection and confronting one's inner demons, where Celeste's themes of self-reflection are most prominent. The level is split into two halves, the first being in the creepy ancient Mirror Temple, and the other literally being inside Madeline's head. But even before we enter Madeline's psyche, we can start drawing parallels to what the process really looks like in reality. The first half of the level starts as a narrow, well-lit ruin. There are some foreign, unnerving statues here and there, but we're still not that far into the unknown yet. This changes significantly, though, as we move throughout the level. Tight, well-lit corridors are replaced with dim, more open chambers, and then those become vast, dark expanses. Vines begin weaving throughout the background, unsettling imagery of unknown creatures loom in the darkness. Madeline is very obviously straying further and further from the known world. The background music, composed by Lena Raine, even mirrors this descent into the unknown, with the signature looping piano melody being replaced with darker, more ambient tones as we descend deeper into the temple. I believe this represents the beginning of the introspective process perfectly. You start the process close to reality and the known world, and make progress deeper into your own mind until you finally reach your inner demons. You don't start by immediately confronting your bad side. Instead, you often have to spend time uncovering it deep within your mind. and the structure of Chapter 5's first half represents this perfectly. As for the statues resembling strange eyeball creatures, I interpret this to represent the influence that mental health has on the rest of your psyche. These statues are foreshadowing the entities Madeline is chased by in the second half of the level, representing how mental illness creeps its way into and tarnishes your mind and your thinking. We eventually arrive at the second half of the level after Madeline uncovers a large, ancient mirror deep within the temple. Earlier in the level, she finds out that Theo, a companion she initially entered the temple with, has gotten trapped inside a sort of mirror world. So she enters the mirror in order to find him. Upon entering the mirror, however, we are welcomed by a rather dark and gloomy environment. Gnarled vines twist and turn throughout the rooms as an ominous haze seems omnipresent. Small tentacle-like masses writhe on the floors and walls. Harsh, piercing synths quickly pan from right ear to left ear, creating a head-filling sensation for this very hard-to-listen-to background track. This is the dark side of Madeline's brain, where her flaws, insecurities, regrets, and all sorts of mental afflictions reside, and it is already being portrayed as an unwelcoming place, even to Madeline herself. We then come across Madeline, who explains that this foreboding place is her mind. An argument between the two then leaves Madeline scared and panicking, pleading for Madeline to get them out of there, but to no avail. Madeline then presses on, now with the foreshadowed eyeball creatures pursuing her. Although Madeline is not deliberately trying to be introspective here, we can still draw some significant parallels to what introspection looks like in the real world. Reflecting on and confronting one's flaws is incredibly stressful even when it's done intentionally. This is perfectly portrayed both by the environment and Madeline's adverse reaction to it, with her initial denial and then fear towards her own twisted mind being especially realistic. Her own brain, interestingly enough, seems to be also overtly hostile towards herself via the eyeball creatures. This can be interpreted to parallel something like intrusive thoughts, which often emerge during introspection like Madeline's doing here. This level is such a great portrayal of the introspective process. The gameplay, the music, and the art direction all portray just how difficult and stressful self-reflection is, especially when reflecting upon the more detestable parts of your personality you'd rather discard. This is an incredibly significant part of both Madeline's story and the long road of overcoming mental illness. But what follows this anxiety-inducing level is arguably just as important. Madeline comes to the wrong conclusion, and it costs her dearly. Chapter 6, titled Reflection, opens with Madeline escaping the Mirror Temple with Theo. The two decide to settle down for the night and make a campfire, and as the two converse, we get more insight into the more specific parts of Madeline's mental health. She's depressed, has regular anxiety attacks, and ultimately feels like she's trapped, mentioning that she has no real person to turn to for support and no solid coping mechanisms beside drinking. She also comes to the conclusion that the part of her represented by Madeline is holding her back, and Madeline becomes determined to somehow get rid of her. The two then fall asleep, and we enter into a sort of dreamscape where Madeline confronts her darker self. She tells Madeline that she's not a true reflection of her, and she's the part of her that she needs to let go, intent on setting her free. At this somewhat naive remark, Madeline becomes enraged, calling Madeline stupid for thinking that she can just let her go and abandon her. Madeline is an integral part of Madeline's personality, one that can't just be released, and Madeline is ostracized and mocked for thinking that she's above this part of her. The result of this confrontation is Madeline being cast down into a chasm far below, with virtually all of her progress climbing the mountain being erased. When I first analyzed this scene, I took it at face value like many others did. The main message of this scene is that you can't just run away from your problems and cast aside your struggles as easily as that. But when analyzed within the context of self-reflection, I came across another wonderful takeaway. Introspection does not always yield the correct answers. In the real world, coming to understand your flaws and what exactly is affecting you is a time-consuming trial-and-error process that doesn't always go your way. And this scene that follows Madeline's initial episode of self-reflection in the Mirror Temple paints that picture clearly. Only when she reconsiders how significant a part of her Madeline is, does she come to understand that she has to come to terms with those flaws and move forward with them. At the end of the level, Madeline once again confronts Madeline, but instead of viewing her flawed counterpart through the lens of hate and regret, Madeline instead seeks to make amends and truly work together with the side of her that's been holding her back. And although there is pushback and heavy resistance from Madeline, she eventually accepts Madeline's offer, and in one of the most powerful moments in the game, the two halves become unified, granting Madeline a newfound strength to move forward. For those of you who already have played the game, you already know how this ends. And those who haven't can probably infer. Madeline, now working together with her dark side that has been holding her back for her entire adulthood, climbs the entirety of Celeste Mountain and reaches its summit in one of the most beautiful moments in gaming history. Celeste's message on overcoming mental illness has resonated with many, including myself. The insanely creative ways Celeste represents mental illness and the introspection necessary to overcome it is both incredibly artistic yet real, with pain and productivity both featured prominently within Madeline's story. This game has helped me come to terms with my loneliness and depression, and now, years after I initially played the game, its message still means so much to me. Self-reflection is imperative for growth. And just as Thorson said on stage at the Game Awards,
You deserve credit for that. That change came from inside of you, and you're capable of a lot more. Thank you.